Hey, Pioneers. Welcome to episode number 449. And today's podcast, we're going to be talking about how regenerative farming can help to save the planet and your skin. This ended up being a fascinating episode as we started diving into lard and tallow and how the fats of lard and tallow differ, how they're similar, and as well as how raising pigs, regenerative agriculture, where that affects the quality of those fats and where it doesn't. I think you are going to find this a fascinating episode that dives into skincare as well as our food, regenerative agriculture on many different layers. It ended up being a phenomenal episode, which sounds weird for me to say. I had a phenomenal episode, but it was such an interesting interview that Charles and I actually, I'm like, we're going to have to do a follow-up episode because there's so many things that we wanted to dive into further in this discussion. So I think you are going to really enjoy this episode, regardless if you're coming at it from learning about regenerative agriculture, from the health standpoint, as well as skincare, with some really cool, interesting tidbits of history and how those have came into play to shape our modern, really food system, as well as our modern agriculture system. So it was just kind of a buffet, if you will, of all different things surrounding this topic. So you can go to melissaknorris.com/449, because this is episode number 449. And we will have links to everything that we're talking about today. If you're listening to this the old fashioned way, via your phone on the go. If you're watching this on the YouTube channel, then we'll have the link to that blog post right beneath the video description. But today's guest is Charles, who is the founder of Farrow Skincare, which is a lard-based skincare brand that manifested from his experience as a regenerative farmer. Pharaoh's smart lard technology was discovered through Charles' experience as a pasture pig farmer. And when combined with his culinary skills as a cookbook author, Pharaoh came to life. Charles leads Pharaoh's commitment to producing nourishing products through high integrity ingredients and human touch. The company launched in January of 2022 and continues to rely on organic growth through customer word of mouth and podcast appearances. Pharaoh's mission is to educate consumers on optimal strategies for skin health and create products to accelerate that process. Now, today's episode is officially sponsored by Azure Standard, who has a lot of similarities actually with Charles and Farrow Skincare, in that they are looking to be good stewards and to partner with companies and with products and people who are doing things ethically, morally, just being a good steward of what they have been given and is in their care of animals and in the land with farming. And I love being able to find and partner with companies like this in order to give you options. These are places that I shop from as well, so that we can find these resources and to help support them and to help get the word out. I think a lot of what you'll hear in today's episode, to some of you, it may be new, and to others, you might know parts of it, or you might be like, yes, and it just helps to kind of reinforce. But it's so important that this message continues to rise and this information continues to get out to people, because as you'll hear, there's so many that don't know a lot of these things. And it's very important that we bring this to the forefront so that people can make truly educated decisions about where they're spending their dollar, but more importantly, about what they're putting on their skin and into their bodies for their health. So I love Azure Standard because they have a very similar standard to that of myself and most of the people that you will hear me have come on this podcast and get to learn from as well. If you are a brand new customer to Azure Standard, you can use coupon code Melissa15 and get 15% off your first time customer or first order of $100 or more. And Azure Standard, one of the really fun things is they have just started with a clothing items and options as well on their website. So I have used them for my pantry on things we're not growing ourselves or not able to source locally for years now. And I'm super excited to see that they are bringing in some items as well for clothing. So you'll want to check that out. I've got my eye on some of their wool socks, and we'll also be looking at some of their other products as well. Okay, without further ado, here is my interview with Charles. Okay. Well, Charles, welcome to the Pioneering Today podcast.
Pleasure to be here, Melissa. We were trying to figure out when we saw each other last, and it's been a minute.
Yeah, it has. And we finally did figure it out. We narrowed it down. We was at White Oak Pastures last spring. We were there for a conference, and being on one of probably one of the most well-known regenerative agriculture farms in practice at large scale anyways. And so that was very fun to see in person what they were doing, and also get to meet other folks that are going down that road, and just to see the way that regenerative agriculture is being used really all across the country. And there's the basic principles, but then you're seeing it, used slightly different and modified to size and everything like that, which is fun. So maybe a great place to start would be talking about how regenerative farming can save the planet and your skin. Because I think a lot of times we think of regenerative farming really as food production, which of course it is, but there's other aspects to it as well. So a little bit about like how you define regenerative farming, and then diving into talking about that alongside with skincare.
Perfect entree there. Thank you. I keep it very simple, and I would agree with you. Regenerative farming sort of gets it gets spoken a lot. My definition is really easy. If you're making dirt, if you're building soil, dirt's probably not the best term to use. If you're building
we'll get in
soil,
trouble. Someone will say dirt is dead, soil is living.
Yeah.
I've gotten schooled. Yeah.
I corrected myself, but if you're building soil, you're farming regeneratively. Now that there's a spectrum there, but I would say ultimately, if the organic matter in your soil is going up, even by just a tick on an ongoing basis, then what you've done is you have aligned with a natural process through your farming practices that build soil. And so I keep it pretty much as simple as that. There's a lot of folks that, we can unpack it a little bit more. When you start talking about farming, most people think grains and vegetables, the garden, and I'm not bemoaning any of those or casting them to the side, but to truly build soil, you need animal inputs. And so this is where I think, again, what Will's doing and the Harris family down at White Oak, Joel Salatin up at Polyface. I know y'all have plenty of folks on the West Coast. I'm just not out there as often as I'd like. What they're doing is they're taking natural systems, herding herbivores, followed by migratory birds, kept in check by predation and various things. And they're putting that into in an industrial or a production model at scale. And it can be scaled very far down the ladder to a homesteader type setting. And it can be scaled. We were talking about Will Harris and White Oak. I believe White Oak represents almost the biggest you could get, while still holding on to all of the, conviction and underlying sort of husbandry that's involved with truly high integrity regenerative farming when it comes to animal husbandry and things of that nature. And so, I'd love to see, and Will would tell you this if he was on here with us, he'd say, I'd love to see a White Oak Pastures in, every state in the country. But, at his scale, and I think they're harvesting maybe 40 to 50 head of beef a week. That's a massive scale it is. For certainly for someone homesteading, that feels massive. But even smaller farms, excuse me, the Polyfaces of the world. We've got a great farm about an hour and a half down the road from me called Sequatchie Cove Farm, and a number of others around here. But yeah, it's that's it. So it's soil, and in order to do that in the most efficacious and environmentally friendly way, you should incorporate animals, and not just an animal. It's multi-speciation. There's a whole bunch of stuff involved there, and pigs don't get the credit they deserve, I believe, in the regenerative farming movement. They're my favorite farm animal by a long shot, but they play a critical role in that. Even though they're a monogastric omnivore, herbivores do most of the heavy lifting when you really talk about building soil. But the omnivores, the chickens, pigs, turkeys being sort of your predominant species there, they're doing sort of tangentially side work, pasture sanitization, rototilling when it comes to pigs, and really sort of managing the nooks and crannies of a farm in a great capacity. And so we can go anywhere you want to from there. But
yeah, no, I love that. And really, I think when we look at regenerative farming, to your point of it being, it's all parts of the ecosystem in nature, right? We're using multi-species, multi-plants. And that's really, when you look at nature designed before man, really came in and we have what we know as conventional modern agriculture today, that is what we saw. So it's almost like a returning back, but in a more controlled environment, purposely moving the birds, right? They're not like my chickens are not flocks that are flying overhead like wild ducks, that type of thing, that I'm purposely putting them into chicken tractors or poultry netting to direct them in a direct pattern. But it is very much mimicking what we would have seen historically, on the prairies and the grassland, of course. And to your point, yeah, all animals and species can play a role. And I think probably I've heard Joel Salatin probably speak the most about using pigs, probably, or just, Joel has such I don't mean loud that almost sounds negative, and I don't mean it that way, but he has been blessed to speak to so many. And he really does, the pigness of a pig, embracing that. And
he wrote a book about it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And using that, to your advantage. And we too have used pigs here on our place quite a bit, actually, to reclaim pasture, rebuild pasture. To your point, like, they can be really, really great. They can also be very damaging too, if you just put them in a small confine and just, keep them there. Sadly, they can be damaging to the soil. So it's all about knowing how to manage them and balance, which would probably be an entirely different episode. Like, you could go down each of these things. But I really wanted to talk about today is both about regenerative farming with pigs, and our skins, but and skin use, because what I think is so fascinating that I've gotten the chance to see now, going to some of the different areas and getting to connect with people, is the different ways that regenerative farming can be used for the health and benefit of the land, of the animals, and of people, but also the way that people are using some of the different products, right? Because of course, you think usually raising pigs are either raising to sell your litter, if you're doing feeder piglets for folks, there's a whole thing there, or you're raising them and you're selling like half hog or whole hog, bulk, not beef buys, but pork buys, and that type of thing. But you also have using with the homestead aspect, and this is where I think for a large farm, seeing what White Oak does has been really amazing, is they try to use all parts of the animal. So it's really cool from a business model, honestly, and then even all the way down to a homestead model. And you guys, what I thought was so interesting is how you are doing that with the lard, because a lot of times we do sell very small scale. We'll raise and sell whole or half pork pies. And I'm always amazed at both. When we do it with beef, we do quarter, half, or whole beef. Most people just get a half or a quarter of a beef. Like, most of the people don't take the tallow or the lard. So I take it because I'm like, I'm not letting it go to waste. But I'm really amazed at how many people they've never been shown. They don't know how to use it. They don't even really know. It sounds, once like, it sounds kind of almost silly to say people don't know how to use lard. But when you think about it, you go to the grocery store, unless you're very seekingly looking for it. And even then, if it's just a big, large grocery store, you don't even see lard on the shelf. You don't see cooking shows for the most part. People on, what are some of the, like, Food Network, for example, they're not cooking with tallow and lard. so people don't
Not
know. And when
yet.
you go, not yet, I know we are coming, right? Like it's up and coming. And when you go to the skincare aisle, if people aren't making it themselves at the store, you're not seeing lard based, at least I haven't, at like, major chains. I haven't seen lard based face creams.
No,
And
no,
so people
doesn't
just don't
exist
have
on retail
on
shelves.
lard.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So on one hand, I'm like, if you've been around it a long time, you're like, oh my gosh, how do people not know this? But then if you kind of take a step back and look at what people's normal exposure would be to it, how would they know? It's not something that's being practiced large scale.
Well, funny you ask or mention that. So part of the origin story of Pharaoh, which is our skincare brand, was I was raising hogs, and we started off as a finisher. In beef production, you sort of have there's three industries baked in the cake of raising beef, of eating a hamburger. Okay, you've got the cow calf operation, which is making new babies. You've got the sort of the steer yearling. You've weaned them off mama, and now it's time to pack on the frame. And then you've got the finishing side of the house. And so within taking a newborn calf to turning that into hamburger patties, there's really three different farming models baked in the cake there. With pigs, it really does sort of get down to two, and part of that is because you can take a newborn piglet and raise it, feed it to market weight in 7, 8, 9 months, depending on your feed and various things. And so it's a little tighter process. If you're on grass pasture only, you're lucky to get a full framed out, fat packed on animal in 18 months. It ain't happening. 20, 24 months is usually when you've got some subcutaneous fat, which is not where tallow comes from. We can unpack that. But anyway, I was raising pigs, and the first pig I ever butchered for some customers, I had some friends of mine that each bought a half. And of course, they're like, how do you want it cut up? They're like, you just cut it up however you want. We trust you. And so I get the back fat, and I get the leaf fat. I get all the and all that stuff, and I drop it off to them. And I get a phone call like 3 days later from my buddy Luke in Atlanta, and he's like, "What do I do with this fat? Oh man, you grind it up, stick it in your slow cooker, and render it, and then you can cook with it, and you do all these amazing things with it." And he's like, "Oh, cool." And my phone rang about 6 days later, and he's like, "Man, I'm never going to get around to doing that. Just come pick this fat up. It's taking room in my freezer." And so that ended up being the sort of the ethos of many of our customers. They didn't want the fat, so I bought extra chest freezers and started saving it. It freezes very well, and will maintain its integrity for a while. And so when we first launched Pharaoh, this is in 2022. I was still raising pigs and farming and doing all that stuff. But in terms of like the ingredients that go in our product, I had freezers full of fat to lean into. And so I tell you, Melissa, so lard, I like to rewind the clock to 1910. Okay. Now, 1910, we've got big cities. They're growing. They're getting bigger. This is sort of pre-industrial age, right? We hadn't quite figured out a bunch of stuff, but there were no grocery stores. And there is a 100% chance that there's two things here. There's a 100% chance that if you walked in the general store of your town to buy your shoe polish, your nails, your drill bits, whatever, 100% chance you walked out with a can of lard. Full stop. Tallow was, and this is not to degrade tallow. We use tallow in our products. Tallow was almost exclusively reserved for candle and soap making.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. Well, and for your listeners probably know this, but tallow at room temperature is hard. Like you gotta dig in there and sort of get it out, or keep it heated, right? To keep it a liquid. Lard is scoopable. It's measurable.
Yeah, it's more
so
like
if you need a can,
kind of more like shortening, right? Yeah, that's why
it's like
it's a little bit softer.
It's
exactly.
a whole lot more like it's more like Crisco, which launched in 1911. And so everyone, well, it's gross, right? But they bleach
Yes.
Crisco. Crisco is short for crystallized cottonseed oil. They bleach it white because, again, in 1910, you walked in a store, 100% chance there were cans of lard in there. Okay. And so then you got 1911, Crisco launches, and the nail in the coffin of lard in terms of maintaining its presence in our just dialogue and acumen. The nail in the coffin was World War II. And it's not talked about a lot, but lard was rationed in World War II. You could not find it for the war effort. And you ask why? You can't make nitroglycerin out of cottonseed oil. And so if you want to blow something up, you need lard. It is the preeminent animal fat for making nitroglycerin. And so, any shelves that lard still existed on, which were plenty in 1942, were now all of a sudden gone. But hey, here's this can of Crisco, and here's this Crisco cooking book, and this is the greatest thing ever. And so, one of the reasons I'm excited about our company is we're sort of trying to bring back this. Again, everybody knew what lard was, 100 years ago. So that's the number one thing. And then again, in 1910, forget you walk in the store, you're a homesteader like Melissa here, and you're living out, you are going into that store, once a month to pick up stuff, but you're out here surviving on your own. There is also a 100% chance that on your homestead, you had at least one pig, usually 2 or 3, because they're omnivores. They can eat and thrive off of any scraps. They can clean your garden out when it's time to harvest corn. And every fall you can put that hog, when it gets cold enough to hang from a tree, you can put that hog in the larder and eat off of it for the coming year. And so, pigs are still around. People know what pigs are, but just the role they played in our sustenance and ability to survive and thrive, especially in a homesteading environment, it can't be overemphasized.
Yeah. Well, and one of the great things about pigs is, to your point, as you were talking about in the raising, like here we do grass-fed, grass-finished beef. So yes, it's 24 months, 2 years is when we harvest. But with the pigs, I've got not beef, good night. Pigs are not beef. But I've got a meat and fat source that I can have much sooner, and also supplementing with the beef. And so we do both. But one of the things with the Crisco, like if you want to look into marketing, like business wise, if you're a business and studying marketing, which is really simplified to the act of making people aware of your product. I mean, that's what really, like, people think marketing, and a lot of times marketing has this instant like negative connotation, but there is good marketing and there is bad marketing. And marketing in itself is just a vehicle of people finding out about a product and if it is good for them. It's when, black hat or dark or tactics or whatnot, manipulation, et cetera, is used, that's where we think of negatively of marketing. So like with everything, there's a good and a bad way to do it. But if you just pure study of marketing as a business standpoint, looking at how they made Crisco what it is today was genius. Now, remarkable. Bad genius, right? Yeah. But the marketing on that is really honestly incredible, to just from like a case study point to look at it. It sadly that it was used for a product that does not have all of the promises and things that they like to claim, and has not been the answer to health problems. They, as they tried to make it this much, healthier fat and all these different things as marketing wise. But very interesting just on that standpoint alone, but how effective it was. It truly was an effective campaign that has lasted for decades. I mean, really now over a century, sadly. But I kind of wanted to back up a little bit and talk about the differences aside from temperature being, soft at room temperature versus hard. Yeah. And talk a little bit of the differences between lard and tallow, because we've got our lard that comes from pigs, and then tallow that comes from cattle. And because you had mentioned, I'm more familiar with lard. The leaf lard on a pig is traditionally what I use for baking, but I
Mm-hmm.
do use the other forms of lard for like sauteing, meats or more savory things,
Mm-hmm.
or then I'll use it in soap making. I use both tallow and lard for soap making,
Mm-hmm.
candle making, etc. But backing up that a little bit, because you said the subcutaneous fat is not considered tallow when we were talking about beef, or did I hopefully I'm not misquoting
Oh
you
yeah,
there.
let's unpack that. So we use 3 fats in our products. We use lard, leaf lard, and tallow. Okay, and those are really the only 3 fats that you find. So let's unpack this. Tallow is a placeholder term. It's most commonly referring to cow fat, but any ruminant, herbivorous ruminant animal. So you can have bison tallow, elk tallow, deer tallow.
Okay.
Right? But it's
Okay.
the visceral fat. Okay, so the raw fat on a cow, the raw visceral fat on a cow is called suet. And once you've rendered that down, ground it up, and render it down, and then now we've made tallow. You don't see any subcutaneous beef fat in the marketplace sold as a separate item for 2 reasons. One, it's incredibly hard for a cow or any ruminant herbivore to pack on excess calories in the form of subcutaneous fat, right? And so you see that fat in the grind or the cap of your New York strip or your ribeye. You don't see it set aside here and rendered out for anything. Tallow is that's what tallow is for. Okay, now lard. Well, let's skip lard for a minute. Leaf lard, you mentioned it. Leaf lard is the tallow adjacent equivalent from a pig. If you hear the term lard, we're talking about specifically the pig. Okay, tallow can be a whole bunch of animals, and it's their visceral fat. Leaf lard is the rendered visceral fat from a pig. So in a lot of ways, it's similar in both vitamin storage content. It's a little more viscous at room temperature. Leaf lard's it's doughy at room temperature. You got to get in there and dig around with it. But in both cases, and I like to talk about this, in both cases, those fats from a biological standpoint are protected from the potential nefariousness of the animal's diet and also environment and lifestyle. Okay. Now, more so let's just go back to tallow for a minute. A cow, you can get healthy, happy, good tallow from a industrially raised cow, right? It doesn't have to be grass fed or grass finished, because the viscera, that sac of organs, much like the placenta protects an unborn child from a lot of toxification around the mom, the viscera of an animal does the same thing. And so from a quality of fat, the omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acid ratio, vitamin A's, E's, D's, all that fun stuff, the general nutritional value of the visceral fat doesn't tick up or down too much with positive or negative environmental factors. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Which is also why, again, back to visceral fat, it's also why leaf lard is prized, this, for baking and frying. Yes. It's odorless and colorless because everyone's heard, the Spanish acorn finished Spanish ham, or here's my dream. I want to live in a world where from about September through November, I can feed pigs acorns and pineapple, because I think that would be the coolest, nuttiest, fruitiest flavor you'd ever see. But that flavor's not going to get into the visceral fat. It's going to be stored. It's going to be in the subcutaneous fat, the back fat, the belly fat, the cap on your pork chop. That's subcutaneous fat. So this is why leaf lard is prized as a baking fat, because it's not imparting a smell or a flavor to your pie crust, to your biscuits. Okay. Which is originally why we use more leaf lard as a ratio of the fats. We're heavier on leaf lard with our facial product because it's up by the nose, right? And all right, so that's tallow, that's leaf lard, and now lard. Again, you don't see lard from the beef side of the house because it's all in the grind. It's all and it's very hard for a ruminant herbivore to pack on extra pounds. You feed a pig, they're an omnivore, right? They're a monogastric omnivore. You can feed a pig anything, and if there's excess caloric load there, they're going to preferentially store that in their subcutaneous fat. And so it's going to have a smell to it. It doesn't smell like bacon, folks. I'm sorry to disappoint you.
No, it's a little porky though.
Fat,
like, I mean, it doesn't smell like bacon, but
little.
It does have a little, like a slight. Yeah.
A slight that also can be determined a little bit by your rendering method. A lot of people, I don't even know why anyone would ever dry render fat. We wet render everything, and it just, so it has to do, okay, you got this big old globule of fat, and subcutaneous fat is built, right? Again, if you've ever pulled the leaf, if you've ever pulled the leaf fat out of a hog or the suet out of a beef, it's this one big globule that's encased in its own viscera, right? It's an organ. That's not the case with subcutaneous fat, which is where lard comes from. You're shaving it off and carving it out and cutting it up. So it's got a little bit more non-fatty material included in it, which turns into cracklins when you render it. And so, keeping the temperature low, keeping the bottom of the pan wet just helps remove as much of that cooked meat smell from your rendered fat. And so
when you're saying,
those are your three fats.
Okay. So dry rendering versus wet rendering is where you've got, it's not that you're like putting it in a pot of water. It's where you've got a small amount of water at the bottom when you're rendering it down.
That's wet rendering.
Yeah, correct.
Dry rendering would be something like cooking bacon. That's a dry rendering process. There's no water involved.
I do wet rendering, like half cup water at the bottom of the slow cooker.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Actually, I didn't know that was called wet rendering. I just thought that was the way, I didn't
rendering.
know you could do dry. Yeah, I just thought I thought that's the way you rendered. Yeah. So this is super, super interesting. So I have a question when you have, especially with tallow, because in my experience, tallow tends to have a little bit more of my lard very rarely ever has a smell, in all honesty. Like, it pretty much
tallow's the smellier.
Yeah. Is there a way to naturally, naturally, I think is the word I'm looking for, to get that cleaner or less odor? Or is that why it was usually used in soap making? Because you were mixing it with like you were mixing it with other things.
You talking about tallow?
Yeah.
Specifically?
Yeah.
I would say one thing is make sure you trim any and all, because again, you're taking this big organ, but a lot of times there'll be chunks of meat. We grind all of our fat to render it. So just making sure you're trimming off any of the meat
before you're grinding.
Non-fatty. And I would say, even if you're, trimming off a little fat while you're doing it, I think it's well worth it. So a properly trimmed suet, and then, run that through the grinder. I would also say grinding it versus, I see a lot of people chop it up, and chopping it's fine. I think there's something that happens with grinding. I just think it helps it render quicker.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the things that odor emanates from is this long, drawn out cooking process. Don't up the heat.
Okay.
Keep the heat low, but just really, really get that fat ground down and grinding fat's hard. Spend the money and get a really good grinder.
Now you're talking. If you're picking it up from the butcher and you're wanting the fat, ask them if they'll grind it for you. Because to your point, grinding fat is difficult. Well, even chopping the fat, because I've had that too, where I've just gotten, the big chunk, it wasn't ground. And so I was chopping it, and I have to do it in almost a half frozen state. Or at least I found that has worked best for me when I'm chopping it, when it's half froze. So it's not so slippery, dangerous of like actually cutting myself, and maybe I'm just a klutz with a knife. But in my experience, I do it when it's like half thawed or half froze.
Sure.
Not rendering it frozen,
beyond,
but I mean chopping it. Just for like home use. Just for home school.
We've scaled beyond we've scaled beyond a homesteader level with our business. But I will tell you, in the early days, and this is for your listeners too, fat refreezes very well. There's not a lot of biological material, not like meat. You know, if you thaw meat and then freeze it again, and so even if you've got this big old hunka beef fat or even leaf lard, you can thaw it out. You can chop off the part you want. And in the early days, I first of all, very soothing, but just a regular old hand meat grind mill works fantastically to fill a slow cooker. You know, we're not filling a 30-gallon vat of this stuff on your stove. And so you don't, I said this earlier, like get the fancy meat grinder. You don't have to at the homesteader level. We've when we make a batch of our ingredients, when we're rendering, it's a 30-gallon pot, and we gotta get things done. But
yeah, which I do want to talk about lard for the skin and skincare, because when I look at the skincare industry, both for myself and then I now have a teenage daughter. And so when I look at what's out there and I'm trying to educate her as to why mom will not buy you this, like we're not using this. This is not, because when she's young and she just doesn't know. But to the point, the marketing and when she goes to the store with her friends or is walking down a cosmetic aisle, there aren't really great options there. Not yet anyhow. So
we're working on it.
I know we really are. And there's great companies that we're now, if you're not, able to do it yourself and stuff, there are some really good options. But for the skin, I think a lot of folks don't even realize. I know I was later in life before. It sounds so silly, but like that your skin is an organ and it's your largest organ. And what you put on your skin is absorbed into your bloodstream. I mean, like it is like there's a reason there's transdermal medications, because you can absorb, like obviously our skin is absorbing, but it didn't really dawn on me when I was a teen or even probably in my early 20s. So on the role of skincare, kind of talking about what we see sadly in most commercial skincare, and then let's talking about lard and its benefits, because I know there's many, and so I really want to. I know we spend a lot of time talking about the other stuff, but I want to dive into this too because they do go hand in hand and are super important.
Yeah, sure. So skincare is a fat-based industry. It should be. And if you can go all the way back in Egyptian, bathing Cleopatra with milk. Well, it was really the milk fats doing a lot of the work to make her skin so beautiful. But skincare, by and large, is a fat-based industry, which again is why today most of us have skin issues. I mean, dry skin, various things. The further the man has gotten from shoot the bow, fire the rifle, and eviscerate the carcass, butcher this animal, and the woman has gotten away from taking a scoop out of the lard can, and the further we've gotten away from regular visceral contact with animal fats, the poorer our skin has gotten. So skincare is a fat-based industry. If you walk into your retailer, you're looking at 99% of the products in there are emulsified products. So we've taken this fat and we've emulsified it with water. Well, when we do that, we have to add an emulsifier, and we also have to add some type of preservative, because in a completely sterile environment, the water's fine, but sterile environments don't exist. The minute you open a jar, it's not sterile anymore, right? And so the water is what acts as a food substrate for bacteria and mold. Okay, and so you go to the store, you buy your cream. It's going to have three primary components: water, it's usually the first ingredient on that cream, and then a whole bunch of garbage in the middle. Okay, and these are things that you can't. Or actually, the garbage ends up being on the end because it's a little bit. Works does a lot, but it's these preservatives, phthalates, parabens, various things, and emulsifiers, and then somewhere in the middle you got fats. all of those store-bought brands, every single one of them are utilizing, if you're lucky, plant-based fats. You know, olive oil is a plant-based fat, macadamia nut oil, avocado oil, coconut oil. These are all fats derived from a plant. In most cases, it's a seed oil. Okay, so this is whether it's cottonseed oil or, you know, there's a bunch of new exotic sounding oils in skincare. And then the third sort of item that you'll see are petroleum derivatives. And these are all waste products basically from the petrochemical industry that are passed off as fats. You know, Vaseline or petrolatum is probably the most common one that folks will be familiar with. And I would say wholeheartedly, there's a 0% chance that your skin knows what Vaseline is. There's a slight chance it'll know what a seed oil is. There's a fairly good chance, it's in fact 100% chance it's going to know what coconut oil, olive oil, even shea butter for that matter. It's gonna sort of recognize those. But if we want to talk what is skincare, ultimately it's a biology play, right? And so this gets into sort of the difference between tallow and lard too. But it's going to most preferentially, if your skin was hungry, it's your largest organ, it's your second stomach, and it walked up to a buffet of fats, okay? You know, take your toddler to a buffet and see what they eat. They're going to eat all the dessert they can get their hands on. Your skin is going to preferentially choose animal fats, okay? And then above and beyond that, I believe it's going to self-select lard. You might even see chicken fat. It's fat from omnivores. We are a monogastric omnivore. We're basically a two-legged pig, if you really boil it down to that. That's not a degrading statement, folks. And I'll talk about some of that here in a second. But it's going to preferentially choose animal fats. Okay, it's not going to know anything at all about these preservatives and these chemicals that they're also injecting into these products. And so I like to say this all the time: about 99% of the garbage we put on our skin these days, our biology has zero clue what any of that is, because it didn't even exist 100 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And so that's at the end of the day, that's the big thing. Is skincare is a fat-based industry, okay? And then let's unpack it one layer underneath that. Well, what are the three big components of skincare? It's pH, okay? It's lipid balance, okay? So what are the ratios of monounsaturated, saturated, polyunsaturated fats, okay? And then the third piece is, what are the naturally occurring vitamins and minerals that are stored in that fat, and how does that align with me biologically? And you know, one of the biggest things, we see this in the food industry for sure, and just to let your listener know, the food industry and the skincare industry are so similar. Their marketing tactics, their techniques, they're lying to you, they're using crappy ingredients. All, if you see it in food, I can promise you it's happening in skincare. But one of the biggest, I think, frauds that has been just acceptable by most consumers is that somehow a synthetic vitamin or mineral or protein is somehow on par with a naturally occurring, naturally metabolized compound. Okay. And I'll use to keep it on skincare, retinol. Retinol is an absolute buzzword in skincare. You got to get your retinol, whatever, peptide, injectable, blah, blah, blah. Well, retinol,
or hyaluronic
vitamin
acid.
A.
Yeah, hyaluronic acid.
Hyaluronic acid. Love that one. That's a hot button. Got to get your HA. Got to get your hyaluronic acid. Lest we forget that we actually make hyaluronic acid ourselves. Okay, but why not find hyaluronic acid or vitamin A from a fat where that compound was naturally metabolized and naturally stored? Again, tangential, but Beyond Burger, I think Beyond Meat, got in a ton of trouble. I forget how much they paid out in fines for this about 4 or 5 years ago, because they were claiming on their package that their serving of whatever Beyond Burger garbage they were peddling had 19 grams of protein per serving. And on paper, it did. But what they didn't tell everybody, and they knew this, was that because this pea protein is basically unrecognizable by your biology, that when you eat this garbage, you're only going to absorb or metabolize about 11 grams of protein. And so people were eating what they thought was, call it 2 or 3 servings of protein or whatever, but they were only effectively getting, just because it goes in your mouth doesn't mean it gets in your body. Correct. Right? Because we got a southbound tunnel down there that lets things go that we don't need. And so again, this idea that some synthesized, chemically produced vitamin or mineral or compound is somehow on par with what occurs naturally in nature is a complete bait and switch trick. Which brings me to why skincare, I believe skincare is I'm not going to say it's a bigger issue because we don't necessarily put skincare on every day. We got to eat food every day. So we're constantly sort of feeding ourselves. But we don't understand if our skin eats something, it's in the bloodstream like that.
Super fast.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that's where it's being absorbed into.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. If we swallow something, that something, what for better or for worse, has to go through this highly acidic, chain of, your stomach and then your small intestines. It's got to go through a whole maze of things. And quite frankly, in a healthy gut, we know this now, a healthy gut is it's a semi-permeable membrane, right? And so to keep things out per se, maintain its presence in the small intestines and large intestines, not pull it into the body. You don't have those safety mechanisms with your skin. And so, it's death by 1,000 cuts using these products, but those cuts add up over time, which is one of the reasons why we have our products, and we're encouraging folks to try them.
Yeah. Well, there's so many things there. I mean, you look at when the body doesn't know when it doesn't recognize something, right? It doesn't even know the proper pathways to eliminate it in a lot of cases. And so it stores it in a fat cell. And so if you have a large accumulation, which most folks today do, because it's like you said, it's in your cleaning products, it's in your laundry detergent, it's in your skincare. Like it's just so many different places aside from our food. But a lot of times we don't even think about those, at least initially. But you have this buildup in the body. So not only does it not know what to do with it, but then it doesn't even know how to eliminate it. So it just stores it in a fat cell because it's like, I got to protect it. And so I'm just going to store it in this fat cell because that's a body's protective mechanism. And so then you end up with some effects of toxicity that we don't even necessarily realize is that it. And then you have this buildup of accumulation as well that then can cause a whole bunch of other issues. And so it's amazing. And I agree with you. It's from the synthetic standpoint, like synthetic, I can't think of an instance where synthetic is actually better, especially like long-term when you look at everything. And a lot of these things, like you can put in a synthetic vitamin into skincare or even into a supplement, but where that natural part would be found in fat that has these other ingredients, that's actually what allows the body to absorb it and to put it to use. And so if you have this one synthetic thing that you've taken out and you don't have all of these other components that you do in a natural setting, the body can't even absorb it and use it correctly. So anyhow, I love this topic because it's so frustrating to me that people don't know, and not at the fault of people, just that with the way that marketing has been done and what's even available. It's so, and like on skincare products, like we're spending predominantly, like look how much money you're paying for water, because water is usually the first ingredient when you're looking at lotions and stuff. And anyways, so yeah, you got me excited and passionate because it's one of my pet peeves, like that it drives me crazy. But I want to talk about lard specifically on the skin.
Sure.
And why we would want to use lard on our skin, the benefits of that. And then how, your guys' skincare products for those who aren't raising their own or don't have access to lard, not making their own. and talk about that, because there's so many tangents. I mean, we could probably stay on here for hours, honestly, and talk. There's so much around this subject. But yeah, so why lard? And I know you said you guys do a combination, so you use both tallow and lard. Like, walk me through that a little bit on your guys's formulation and the benefits to those. Yeah.
So the swine is divine, but the lard is hard. Okay. So back up. We train our surgeons on pigs. Okay. If you know a friend that has had a heart valve replacement, that heart valve came from a pig. We harvest a dozen or more hormones directly from pigs, and we use them directly in humans. If you have a friend that owns an EpiPen, that epinephrine is from a pig. Okay. The biology of pigs and humans is so incredibly tight. It is beyond compare. Okay. And so why do we use lard in our products? It aligns with human biology better than any other fat. Again, skincare is a fat-based industry on the planet, full stop. Okay. Why do we use tallow on our products? Tallow comes from another animal. We share more biology, again, with pigs than we do cows. We're not a ruminant. We're not a multi-chambered stomach herbivorous ruminant. Last I checked. And so tallow for us acts almost like a sealer. It's not going to absorb as efficaciously in your skin as lard is. Now we use it. It's present in all of our skincare products. But again, I think of it as a sealer, right? So the lard soaks in, and the tallow, even if it soaks in a little, it's going to sort of maintain a microscopic layer of fat protection on the outside, on the surface of your skin, and so it locks in that moisture. Tallow is a great fat in terms of, if you look at sort of the optimal fat for the optimal purpose. A sunscreen, a mineral-based sunscreen. We don't have one of those yet. We're developing one out now, but I'm gonna go tallow heavy with that product, because I want that fat sitting up on the surface of the skin combined with those minerals to sort of help create a barrier between noonday sun and your skin. I'd love to unpack sunscreen if you want. But yeah, so lard from a biology. Again, skincare is biology. What is our body? What does our genetic makeup recognize? It's going to preferentially recognize lard. And my goodness, you can read. I mean, I've dug a little bit into this in terms of like the pig's presence in medieval times, all the way back to Pliny the Elder and Marcus Aurelius. And I mean, pigs have been almost lock and key with our understanding of anatomy and how to heal the skin for millennia. And so, yeah, they're just a magical animal. Regrettably today, most pigs in this country are raised in the most abhorrent conditions you can possibly imagine. And back to my statement, the swine is divine, but the lard is hard. Here's what you don't want. You don't want the fat, certainly the subcutaneous fat, from a pig that was raised in an environment that's highly stressful, poor diet, no sunshine. Pigs metabolize vitamin D mechanistically the same way humans do. They metabolize it from the sun, and they store any excess vitamin D that they have in their subcutaneous fat, just like we do, right? And so in the industrial pig model, they don't get to dig, which is the one thing a pig's born to do. So that stresses them out. They're overcrowded, and they never see the sun, Melissa. Like, I like to here. Let me do this. I love this because we're all into food and health, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's into. That's why we homestead, so we can grow our own food, get off the grid. Okay, so have you got a little farm shack out there? You got like a little smokehouse or anything, like a small house?
We have I don't have a smokehouse, but we do have.
You don't have a smokehouse, but you've got a closet. Have you got like a walk-in closet in your house?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so me, you, your hubs and kids, okay, we're going to hire Gordon Ramsay, okay, and Melissa, you're good at this, so we're going to let you pick the menu, okay. So the finest foods, the best fats, all the things, right? And me and your family are going to get Gordon Ramsay, accomplished world famous chef, to prepare us 3 square meals a day. Here's the catch. All of us have to go live in your walk-in closet for the next 4 months. If there's windows in the room, we pull the shutters. We just got to figure it out, right? You're going to go into that room healthy as a horse. You're going to come out of that room sicker than you've ever been in your life. Okay. That is the average day of a pig in this country. No sunshine, arguably a good diet, but they never see the sun and they're overcrowded. They got to poop over here in the corner. What is that going to do to the air quality in there? And so, foundationally, one of the foundational tenets of our business is talking about and lifting up this pastured pork model as the only way that pigs should be being raised in this country. And, I don't want to hear people tell me it's not scalable. I can tell you it is. We've got technology that allows it. It's just no one wants to do the work to try it. It's real easy to turn the lights on and off in that pig house and turn a button that siphons all the feed into but it's abhorrent. And so the animals that come out of that model, their subcutaneous fat is noxious. It's terrible. I tell people all the time, you can go buy your beef at Walmart if you want to. Don't you dare get pork from Walmart. It is.
I'm gonna say don't buy your beef from there either. But
well, fair enough. Fair enough. But listen, I like to talk to the people that are out there on the edge struggling. They're working that third shift. Yeah. At the plant, and I tell you this, I would rather them eat Walmart beef than a box of Cheerios or a Pop-Tart or stop at Taco Bell on their way home. It's sort of bad, good, better, best, right? Let's meet everybody on the spectrum, if you will. But we can also agree that down the road we'd like to see people not shopping there, or at least a Walmart that did all this garbage. But yeah, I mean, you have to raise a healthy, happy pig in order for the fat and the meat. I love the pork campaign in the mid to late 1980s when pork sales were at their lowest ever, and they come out with pork, the other white meat. And I can tell you, if you've ever raised a healthy, happy pig, their meat is not white. But when you raise them in the absence of sun and fresh air and quality food, color is nutrition. You want to pick the ripe apple. You want to pick the ripe tomato. Color means we're ready to eat, and
we want that deep gold yellow butter. Man, you don't want white butter.
No, you don't want white butter, and I would argue you don't want white tallow. You do want white lard, though. Just for your listeners, and make sure it's white. But yeah, how the pig is raised, and listen, how the pig is fed is important. But also, I say, look at humans. Humans can eat. Obviously, the better we eat, the more resilient we are, right? But exercise and environment and sunshine and community and all these other things are a part of our diet, right? And so we talk about what the animals eat in the food production system. We don't talk about their environment as much as we should. And that is especially the case with pigs. You absolutely have to do it. This is why you see tallow. Another reason I think you see tallow brands everywhere, because you can source your beef suet from an industrial feedlot cow, and because it's protected inside of that viscera, it's not going to be as problematic. You can't do that with pigs.
I think we're just going to have to do another episode where we talk about sunscreen because I would love to talk about sunscreen, but I'm like, ooh, we've covered a lot. I think we're just going to have to do a follow-up and we're going to need to dive into that one because there's so much there. But with the pigs coming back to using, lard on the skin, um, and I'd love to talk a little bit too about skincare it's a crowded market, honestly. And so with your guys' company, Pharaoh, would love to kind of talk about that and your inspiration to launch it and then where people can find out more about it and look at your guys' products. Yeah.
Sure. Inspiration to launch it was I had a god awful sunburn, like stage 4, arguably second degree burn, sunburn, and came home to an empty house in a small town late at night. Probably 50% desperation, 50% curiosity. I grew up going to the beach. My mom would keep a jar of aloe vera in the refrigerator. So if we got sunburned, we had that cool compound to put on. And so I had some, I think actually it was leaf lard that I had rendered in my refrigerator. And so again, half curious, half desperate, I just covered my body in this stuff. And Melissa, I'll tell you, I could still remember, I can close my eyes and remember it because I greased myself really good. I mean, I was shining, boys. Let me tell you. And I went and sat in my living room. Again, it's late night, small town, East Tennessee. And I will tell you this, in less than 10 minutes, you would have not ever known I put that stuff on my skin. My skin literally ate it. It was, again, I want you to imagine greasing up real hard and then gone. Okay. And so I did that that evening. I got up the next morning, did it again. So 2 applications. In 2 or 3 days, my sunburn was gone, which I thought was really cool. I've got this background in sort of paleo nutrition and cooking and fitness and all that fun stuff. So, when something happens, you learn to pay attention, right? Okay,
Yeah.
this happened. So let me watch and see what else happens. And Melissa, I watched my skin like a hawk for 3 weeks because I knew it. I knew it was coming. And when I never peeled, not one stitch of my skin ever peeled off my body, not even the little like crinkly peels, on your shoulders, because that skin moves around so much. And that was really the light bulb moment for me. And so it worked really well on what I would consider to be the most common acute skincare conditions, certainly from, May through September for most of us. And so started tinkering around, started giving people samples. Early recipes. I'm sure Katie, the wellness mama. She's another podcaster, blogger in the space. I think I found a recipe from her, DIY skin cream, and it was some emulsification of coconut oil, water, and beeswax, different ratios, and you got to heat everything up. And so I'm like, awesome, right? So I just did a 1-for-1 substitution of lard for coconut oil. Why not? And Melissa, it made the most luxurious creams I've ever made in my entire life, until about 6 days later, I come home. I'm like, I'm gonna lather up. I open the jar up. It's turned black and smells like death because because the water feeds the bugs. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make this journey as quick as possible, but it really. So what do I do then? Well, so then I'm Googling again, DIY. Okay. What are the antibacterial essential oils? Okay. I'm not a chemist. I'm not an esthetician. I'm not a dermatologist. So I start dumping those in there. Okay. Maybe I get it to 7 days, 8 days, 9 days, but at some point that thing's turning black and smelling like death. And so at some point, I think I bought a couple products and started trying to read the labels and what the hell are they putting in here? And at some point, I just threw my hands up. And this is actually when tallow came into the fold. This. Lard is darn near liquid at room temperature. And I'm like, well, I can't sell that. It's got to be creamy. And so I started bringing the tallow in at different ratios and playing with it. And so long story short, I made samples. I started handing them to my farming clients. 2020, lot happened in this was back in 2019. A lot happened in 2020. The world went sideways. Sort of had this thing up on a shelf. And I was having lunch with a friend, and he's like, man, that stuff you made, it was remarkable. And so started looking into it. What I have learned since then is, I did it for sunburn, but razor burn, wind burn, any of these acute skincare conditions, this stuff is the most remarkable thing you've ever put on your skin. And, I've been very fortunate in my life. I don't have rosacea or eczema or psoriasis or cheilitis or any of these chronic, potentially autoimmune symptomatic responses on my skin. But my God, people, I get an email every week from somebody. Name the skincare condition. I got precancerous sores that just went away. I've got gynecologists using this on their pre and postmenopausal clients for vaginal atrophy. And it's like, I didn't even know that was a thing. It's just, so I'm going to come back to the biology. It's because of the biology. Our website is Farrow, Farrow, which as a noun refers to a new batch of baby piglets, and as a verb refers to the farmer that you alluded to this earlier. Like, are you weaning baby pigs and raising them? I was like, you mean farrowing? So we're leading forward with the pig, but it's Pharaoh.life is our website. And confession, I have been looking forward to today for a very long time. So much so that I almost completely lost track of the fact that today is election day. Like, I was like, what am I going on with Melissa? And then I realized, it hit me this morning. I'm like, holy crap, it's election day. Anyway, I absentee ballot, or not absentee, I early voted a couple weeks ago. So get out there and vote, folks. Although I think this will air after the fact.
It will, but yes.
Yeah. I would love to put a code together for your listening audience. I think we could probably do it in real time right here. And by the time it airs, it'll be live. So
yes. And we'll put beneath this where it's on YouTube. We'll have it. We can put it in the video description. And then I always have a blog post that accompanies the episodes too.
Great.
So we'll make sure that it gets put in all those different spots for folks so they can go and grab that. That'd be phenomenal. Yeah.
What do you want the code? We'll give you all a 15% discount off any of our products. What do you want the code to be, Melissa?
Awesome. Let's just do Melissa 15. Does that work?
I think that will work. Actually,
Okay.
You know what? We're in the day of technology. Let me just double check. I don't think we have a Melissa.
Okay.
Walking and chewing gum here. Let's see. Since we're finishing it, how's the weather out there? I know you look like you're covered up. We're still kind of mild here.
Yeah, we had our first killing frost, and we're hanging out. Kind of depends on the day. Usually the highs right now are about mid to high 40s Fahrenheit. So it's not super cold yet. It's just really wet. Okay, to you that's cold. I forget when I talk to people who live in more in the South, I'm like, oh, like it's still kind of mild.
Listen, no, 40's mild. I'll grant you that. Okay, Melissa 15 is a go.
Yeah, perfect.
40's mild, but that when you say 40's the high, I'm like, no, can't do it. Not yet. I'll do it for 3 months, starting in maybe late December, early January. So,
yeah. Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Well, this
all right. So
Melissa 15.
Melissa
Perfect.
15. Yep.
All right. Thank you. Super excited for that. And yeah, we'll have to come back on. There are so many things I would love to dive further into and talk about with you. So we'll get you scheduled and come back on. I'd love to talk about sunscreen and diet in regards to sunburn. Like, oh goodness, like we'll have a really great follow-up episode. Yeah.
I'd love that. Anytime. I'm a huge fan of your work. I appreciate the audience that you're speaking to, and I have homesteading aspirations. I want to get back on the land one of these days. It's just
awesome. Love hearing that. So yeah, great. Well, we'll get that scheduled and we'll do a follow-up. And so thanks so much for coming on, Charles. This was just a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that episode as much as I did. I found it fascinating and can't wait to have Charles back on, where we will be discussing things about sunscreen. So if you've got questions around that, please make sure and put them either in the comment box beneath this video, if you're watching it on YouTube, in the comment section underneath the blog post, or in a review if you're listening to this in your favorite podcast app. I can't wait to have him back. And as always, I look forward to seeing you here next week. Blessings and mason jars for now, my friends.